world is full of quiet corners and forgotten stories. Tonight, we step away from the light to examine the shadows. Welcome to Dark Deeds. Settle in, get comfortable, and let's look for the truth together. Death has always been defined by its absolute, unyielding silence. For most of human history, when a life ended, the boundary between the living and the departed was drawn in permanent ink. The conversations ceased mid-sentence. The laughter faded into the walls. The mundane, daily check-ins, the unsolicited advice, the inside jokes, they all vanished in an instant. Those left behind were forced to rely on fragile memories, fading photographs, and the heavy realization that they would never hear that specific voice again. The silence was the ultimate proof of absence. But the turn of the 21st century brought about a quiet revolution. We have inadvertently constructed a secondary plane of existence. We live our physical lives, but we constantly echo in the digital world. We leave behind an astonishingly vast footprint of text messages, voicemails, social media updates, and endless, searchable threads of emails. Our digital ghosts are stored on servers in cold, windowless rooms, thousands of miles away, suspended in an eternal, unchanging present. When a physical heart stops beating today, the digital life remains stubbornly intact. Accounts sit dormant, but alive, holding the digital essence of the people we have lost. So, we are forced to confront a question that our ancestors never had to consider. What happens when that digital ghost wakes up? What happens when you are sitting alone in the quiet of your home, months after standing over a loved one's grave, and your screen illuminates with a message sent from their account? This is the true, unexplained, and deeply unsettling mystery of Jack Froese. In the early summer of 2011, Jack Froese was 32 years old, living his life in the tight-knit community of Dunmore, Pennsylvania. By all accounts from those who knew him best, Jack was an absolute force of nature. He was the kind of person who seemed to possess more energy, more hours in the day, and more capacity for joy than everyone else around him. He was charismatic, fiercely loyal, and armed with a sharp, wicked sense of humor that instantly endeared him to strangers and cemented his bond with old friends. To his mother, Patty, he was a deeply beloved son. To his cousin, Jimmy McGrath, he was a trusted confidant. And to his close-knit group of lifelong friends, particularly his childhood best friend, Tim Hart, Jack was the undeniable center of gravity. Jack was the glue. He was the guy who made sure people stayed connected, regardless of how busy their lives became. He was the one organizing the weekend get-togethers, sending the random text messages just to check in, and keeping the group chats alive with unrelenting teasing and inside jokes. He was vibrant, healthy, and had a whole, sprawling life stretching out ahead of him. But the universe is indifferent to our plans. On a completely ordinary day in June of 2011, with absolutely no prior warning, no lingering illness, and no time to prepare, Jack Froese suffered a massive and fatal heart arrhythmia. There were no long goodbyes spoken in a quiet hospital room. There were no final words of wisdom imparted to his closest friends. There was no time to wrap up affairs or clear out history. He was simply here, laughing and living at the peak of his life. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The shockwave of Jack's sudden death utterly devastated his community. When someone dies that young, and that unexpectedly, the resulting grief is uniquely heavy and suffocating. It is compounded by a profound, agonizing sense of unfinished business. Tim, Jimmy, and Patty found themselves completely unmoored, navigating a world that suddenly felt distinctly colder and quieter. They went through the agonizing motions that sudden grief demands. They arranged the funeral. They stood together in the heavy summer heat and shared their favorite, tear-filled stories about Jack. They wept, they hugged, and they lowered him into the earth. And then, as the living must ultimately do, they tried to figure out how to keep breathing and moving forward in a reality that no longer included him. Weeks slowly turned into months. The blistering heat of the Pennsylvania summer faded into the crisp leaves of autumn. The sharp, blinding pain of fresh grief slowly began to dull into a quiet, persistent, everyday ache. The family and friends were moving on, carrying Jack's memory with them, settling into the new normal. By November of 2011, 5 long months had passed since the funeral. It was a completely normal, unremarkable evening. Tim Hart, Jack's childhood best friend, was at his home, going about his usual routine. His smartphone rested on a table nearby, a silent companion in the quiet house. Suddenly, the screen lit up. A single notification chimed. It was an email. Tim casually glanced over at the glowing glass, expecting to see a mundane work memo, a promotional advertisement, or the usual daily spam. Instead, his breath caught sharply in his throat. His blood ran instantly cold. The sender's name displayed with crystal clarity on the screen. Jack Froese. Tim stared at the device, paralyzed. The human mind is a powerful, protective machine, designed to find logic and reason, even in the face of the completely impossible. Tim's brain raced frantically through the rational options. Was this a cruel, sick joke perpetrated by someone they knew? Had a malicious stranger somehow managed to hack into his deceased best friend's dormant, unused email account? His thumb hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. The rational fear of opening a cruel prank warred with an overwhelming, desperate, and deeply human curiosity. Taking a deep, ragged breath, Tim pressed the notification. The email opened on his screen. The subject line was just 2 words. Short, incredibly cryptic, and undeniably terrifying. It read, "I'm watching." Tim's eyes slowly moved down to the body of the email. What he read next sent a profound, physical chill down his spine, completely and instantly shattering any simple, rational explanation he had desperately tried to construct in his head. The message read, "Did you hear me? I'm at your house. Clean your ing attic." If this exact email had been sent to a stranger, it would read like aggressive, nonsensical spam. But to Tim Hunt, it was a thunderbolt of impossible reality. Just a very short while before receiving that exact email, Tim had been up in his own attic. It was a dusty, cluttered, completely unorganized mess. But more importantly, the state of Tim's attic was a long-running, highly private, inside joke between him and Jack. Before Jack passed away, he would constantly tease Tim about the state of his house. He would playfully harass him, telling him he was a mess, demanding that he finally go up there and clean it out. It was a hyper-specific, intimate detail of their friendship. It wasn't something you could guess. But even more inexplicable and terrifying than the content of the message was the timing. How could a hacker, a random prankster, or anyone else in the world possibly know that Tim had just been standing in that messy attic, alone in his private home, in the exact moments right before the email was delivered? Tim's hands shook violently as he rapidly typed out a reply. He asked questions, he demanded answers, he hit send, and he waited, staring unblinkingly at his inbox. But the inbox remained, stubbornly, hauntingly silent. There was no reply. If this had been an isolated incident, it might have been categorized as a highly disturbing anomaly. A cruel trick played by a very observant hacker who happened to get incredibly, impossibly lucky with their timing regarding the attic. But Tim Hart was not the only one. Around that exact same time in November, Jack's cousin, Jimmy McGraw, was dealing with his own physical problems. Jimmy had recently been involved in a frustrating accident. He had severely broken his ankle. He was laid up, highly frustrated, dealing with heavy casts and cumbersome crutches, just trying to endure the slow process of recovery. Then, Jimmy's phone chimed. A new email notification. The sender was Jack Froese. Jimmy, much like Tim, felt his heart drop like a stone into his stomach. He recognized the familiar email address immediately. With a complex mix of deep dread and wild anticipation, he opened the message. It read, "Hey Jim, how you doing? I knew you were gonna break your ankle. Tried to warn you. Gotta be careful." Jimmy was stunned into absolute silence. Let's carefully examine the timeline of these events. Jack Froese died suddenly and without warning in June. Jimmy McGrath went about his life and then accidentally broke his ankle in November. This was not a nostalgic callback to a past joke. This was a direct, explicit, and undeniable reference to a specific physical injury that occurred 5 full months after the sender had been buried in the ground. "I knew you were gonna break your ankle." The implications of those words were staggering. When word of the 2 emails spread through Jack's inner circle, it sparked a massive flurry of confusion and frantic questioning. The family immediately began to search for the logical, earthly explanation. Who had Jack's passwords? Who had physical access to his home computer? The answer, after thorough checking, was absolute no one. Jack's mother, Patty, confirmed that she did not have his passwords and had not accessed his accounts. His digital life was completely locked down. So, we return to the central, haunting question at the core of this mystery. How exactly does a dead man send a highly specific email? In our modern world, there are logical explanations we instinctively reach for. The first is hacking. It is technically possible that someone gained unauthorized access to Jack's Gmail account. But consider the motivation of a hacker. Hackers usually want financial gain. They want to steal identities or scrape bank account details. They do not typically log into a deceased man's account just to send highly personalized, grammatically accurate messages referencing private jokes. If it was a hacker, it had to be someone incredibly close to the family. Someone who intimately knew about the attic joke, exactly when Tim was standing in that attic, and that Jimmy had recently broken his ankle. The idea that a grieving friend or family member would orchestrate such a complex, psychologically manipulative prank on Jack's closest loved ones seemed unthinkable to everyone involved. second prevalent theory involves automated technology, known as scheduled emails. There are services that allow a user to meticulously write a message and schedule it to be sent months in the future. Did Jack, perhaps knowing deep down that he had an underlying heart condition, sit down and schedule these emails before he died as a final farewell? It is a deeply comforting thought, but it collapses completely under the weight of the actual evidence. A scheduled email can nicely explain when a message is sent. It cannot, under any circumstances, explain what the message says. If Jack sat at his computer in May and scheduled an email to be sent in November, how could he possibly know to tell Tim to clean the attic on the exact day that Tim was actively standing in it? More impossibly, how could Jack know that his cousin Jimmy was going to accidentally break his ankle half a year after Jack's own funeral? A scheduled email is simply delayed data. It cannot predict the future. It cannot observe the present. It cannot see a broken bone that hasn't happened yet. Faced with an impossible digital mystery that completely defied logic and reason, many families might have panicked. They might have called in cybersecurity experts to aggressively trace IP addresses. They might have contacted Google executives, demanding the account be immediately scrubbed and permanently deleted. But Jack Froese's loved ones chose a vastly different, much more beautiful path. They chose to embrace the mystery entirely. They consciously chose to let go of the desperate need to know the how, and instead focused entirely on the what. When interviewed by reporters about the strange phenomenon, Jack's mother, Patty, did not look frightened or violated. Instead, she smiled warmly through her lingering grief. She didn't care about server locations or malicious hackers. To a grieving mother, desperately missing her son, the technical source of the emails was entirely secondary to the profound, healing feeling they brought with them. "I thought they were wonderful," she told the cameras, her voice filled with a quiet grace. "They were wonderful to receive." For Tim Hart, the aggressive email demanding he clean his dirty attic wasn't a source of terror. It was a final, undeniable, and deeply comforting reminder of his best friend's enduring presence. He didn't feel haunted by a malicious ghost. He felt seen by a brother. He felt like wherever Jack was residing in the great unknown, he was still actively looking out for his friends. He was still giving them a hard time. He was still trying to make them smile. To this day, years after the fact, the emails from Jack Froese remain a genuine, completely unsolved mystery. No hacker ever stepped forward to claim credit for a brilliantly executed prank. No scheduled delivery service or hidden software was ever uncovered in Jack's digital files. The strange, impossible emails eventually stopped coming, leaving behind a profound and permanent digital silence. But it was a silence beautifully punctuated by the lingering warmth of those final, impossible messages. Perhaps it was a 1 in a billion technical glitch in a massive server farm humming somewhere in the dark. Perhaps it was a highly sophisticated, inexplicably motivated hoax perpetrated by someone perfectly hiding in the shadows. Or perhaps, in a vast, complex universe filled with things we are simply not yet equipped to understand, the sheer force of human love and the unbreakable bonds of true friendship can occasionally short-circuit the rigid, logical rules of reality. We leave our vast digital footprints behind in the desperate, quiet hope that we will not be entirely forgotten by the world. We carefully curate our profiles so that something of our essence remains when our bodies fail. But the deeply unsettling and strangely beautiful story of Jack Froese reminds us of something far more profound. It reminds us that sometimes, if you keep your heart open to the impossible, and if you listen closely enough to the silence, the ones we've lost might just find a way to reach across the void and say hello. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, but we'll keep digging regardless. If you have your own theories on this case, I'd love to read them in the comments below. Until the next mystery, sleep well, and keep watching the dark.